Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're testing the new AMD Radeon RX 9060 XT. This comes in two flavours, an 8 and 16GB model. I have the 16GB model here, more specifically the ASUS Prime OC edition, kindly provided by ASUS for purposes of review. This is an almost all black triple fan design, no RGB here. I really like the look of this card, a big fan of simple yet sleek designs such as this. It has a single 8-pin power connector and 3 display connectors, 2 display ports and 1 HDMI up at the front. This model also has a P and Q mode, or performance and quiet BIOS mode, and we'll be using it in the default performance mode, of course, for today's benchmarking. Now in this initial video, I'll be testing 20 games at 1440p resolution. We'll be expanding on FSR and ray tracing later on in the week. I'll feature a couple of tests here today, but the main focus will be 1440p native performance, starting with Black Myth Wukong. Now man ran out of hard drive space, so this is the benchmark version. This is the only benchmark run you're going to see in this video. But the first thing that I noticed was the high clock speed, over 3 GHz. I don't think I've ever seen a GPU clock this high. I have it paired with an i7-12700F and 32 gigs of DDR5 today. Nothing too fancy, but hopefully it's more representative of a real world build for this type of card. A good start then with Black Myth Wukong at over 60 FPS on average at 1440p medium. Now for Call of Duty Black Ops 6 I went with the Extreme preset. Now you're probably going to want lower than this because this is an online competitive title and the more frames the better, but I thought, you know what, let's stick it on Extreme, see what sort of frame rates we get at this resolution, and I'm pleased to say that we saw over 100 frames per second with these visual settings. Now the footage you're seeing is from a bot match, a free-for-all bot match on one of my favourite maps from back in the Black Ops 1 days. This is firing range, of course. Performance will differ depending on the map, but I think it's safe to say you're going to get decent frame rates no matter which game mode or map you are playing with the 9060 XT. As you can see, even in pairing with an i7-12700F, it's still a decent CPU, don't get me wrong, but you're probably going to see this card tested with far more higher end offerings. So I wanted to test with something a little more affordable, but something that can still allow a card like this to stretch its legs. Now you can tell the immediate difference between a bot match and online play, because here in CS2 I'm getting demolished basically every few seconds. The average was over 200 frames per second, however. The game looks really good with the high preset, which it defaulted to when I fired it up. Now in terms of power, the card seems to peak at about 175 watts, this ASUS Prime OC model that is. And as for the clock speed, we've mentioned it before, you're going to often see over 3 GHz, well pretty much all of the time, and in CS2 it's another solid result here. I just hope pricing holds firm, and if not, if you can't find it or it's way too expensive, there's always used 7700 XTs, which I've seen a lot of comparisons to in the few reviews that I've watched already. Of course that will offer less VRAM and won't be as capable when it comes to ray tracing, something we'll touch on later. Now for Cyberpunk 2077, we'll start off with 1440p in the high preset along with high crowds and the default anti-aliasing solution. This does have the choice of FSR, but that was actually disabled here. Even at native I just used the default anti-aliasing solution that the game comes with here, and this gave us 81 FPS on average at 1440p. The 1% low was 62 and the 0.1% low was 55, so it was a pretty consistent experience in and around this busy downtown area. Instead of covering it at the end, which I was originally going to do, I'm going to talk about ray tracing as well now in the games that I actually tested it. I've only got a couple because it's something I want to expand on later on in the week, but Cyberpunk 2077 with ray tracing for at least 60 FPS you're probably going to want 1080p. I wouldn't really say this is the sort of card that you're going to want to enable ray tracing with a lot of the time. It is of course down to personal preference, but if you want to play with ray tracing with the 9060 XT in Cyberpunk, well, we can still use RT Ultra, but we're going to need FSR 3 quality. This will give us 79 frames per second, a 1% low of 62 and a 0.1% low of 49. Now with FSR off, we were looking at less than 60 FPS as an average, which is fine, of course, if you're happy with that, but worth pointing out that for plus 60, we're going to need to implement some form of upscaling for this one. Doom the Dark Age is up next at 1440p. Of course, I should stop saying that because all of the games were tested at 1440p today. Well, apart from the occasional ray tracing test and those situations where we may have had to upscale anyway. We'll get onto that a little later on with Oblivion Remastered, but for now, Doom the Dark Ages, medium preset and TAA gave us 60 frames per second as an average. There were a few dips and drops below that, as you can see here, dipping to the mid to low 50s, but all in all, performance I think was okay here. This is one of the more intensive titles for the 9060 XT that we tested today. Now I've included Elden Ring as more of a consistency test because it is capped at 60 frames per second by default here, and we were able to achieve that with the maximum graphical preset. That said, ray tracing was turned off because that gave us a lot more dips and drops, but the average overall was 60, the 1% low frame rate was 55 and the 0.1% low was 31. I also mentioned the temperature, not just here where we've got an FPS cap, but in other titles as well. It rarely exceeded 50s or the low 50s in terms of degrees Celsius, according to the MSI Afterburner overlay anyway. I certainly think we could have pushed Forza Horizon 5 a little higher. This is 1440p, of course, with the Ultra preset and TAA. I think we could have gone with Extreme mode here because we saw 165 FPS with the Ultra preset, a 1% low of 142 and a 0.1% low of 137. Now, personally, as someone who lives in Britain, I do prefer Forza Horizon 4, I prefer the setting, and I also enjoy the smaller file size as well. It takes up a lot less hard drive space, but I do like Forza Horizon 5 as well, just firing up and driving around sometimes, and it's nice to know that it runs really well on the 9060 XT, runs well on a wide range of hardware, but there are certainly no issues here, and in terms of consistency, it's pretty much flawless. Now when it comes to GTA 5, the legacy version is still more popular according to the Steam most played chart, but I like to test the enhanced version because I think the graphical upgrades are really nice, especially with the higher RT settings enabled. Like here we're using the very high RT preset. In fact, with FSR3 enabled and set to native resolution, so native 2560 by 1440, this is one of my favourite times of day in the game. In some places the lighting can be a bit more subtle, but with RTGI or Ray Traced Global Illuminations on, yeah, there are some really standout zones, and I think this is one of them. I've just stolen a bus and I did attempt to drive it off the end of the pier, which wasn't very nice to all of the remaining passengers, but I failed epically and ended up getting wiped out by my own bad driving. Overall, we're seeing at least 80 frames per second with the very high RT preset. Maximum RT did give us drops below 60 frames per second. I think we averaged around that as well, so the very high RT preset is a better bet with this GPU. Helldivers 2 up next with the high preset here, and nothing else changed for 84 frames per second, a 1% low of 80 and a 0.1% low of 51. Just running around the planet like a maniac, shooting at anything that moves here. Performance was pretty good. There was the odd spike in the frame time graph, but nothing really all that noticeable. And performance overall, yeah, was decent. As you can see, temperature of the card sitting at around 50 degrees, didn't really exceed that, and if it did, it really wasn't by much. I think I mentioned that earlier with the Elden Ring test too. Keep an eye on the VRAM usage and utilisation as well. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 will run with at least 60 frames per second at the Ultra preset. I'm not sure I can say as much for the experimental preset. I didn't test it, but I found that setting things to high made more sense because it gave us a bit more headroom. It still looks absolutely fantastic. This is with SMAA 2TX enabled as well. 79 FPS overall with a 1% low of 70 and a 0.1% low of 68. So not only is the average pretty decent, but the consistency is nice as well. Keep an eye on the VRAM usage and utilisation throughout today's video. Here you can see we're encroaching on that, or exceeding now, that 8 gigs of VRAM. So if we had the 8 gig card, well, at these settings it would be interesting to see what the differences are, and if I can get my hands on the 8 gig version, I'll be testing it and comparing it. It's about $50 cheaper in terms of the MSRP, so hopefully it's about the same price wise here in the UK, 50 quid cheaper. If you can't stretch the extra, then it may be worth it if you're playing at lower resolutions, 1080p, but I can't really say much until I've tested it. If you can't afford the extra, of course, then you're going to want to know whether or not that card is suitable. I don't want to sit here and just say I'll spend the extra, because let's say your budget's maxed out with the 8 gig card, you're going to want to know how it performs. So yeah, we'll be testing that soon. Left 4 Dead 2 is up next. This is the farm level. I know it's an older game, but I wanted to test it because it can still put some hardware through its paces, especially when we max out all the settings like we've done here. 8x MSAA with the highest visual options. Of course, the 9060 XT is handling this with ease at over 200 frames per second, and solid percentile lows too with 151 and 110. I really enjoy this level. Something jumped out at me just before I started recording, so yeah. It's a shame I didn't capture my reaction really, but performance-wise, running pretty well here. For Spider-Man 2, I decided to implement FSR 4. Now, this is, of course, something we can do with the 9000 series cards, and to do it, we just enable it from the Radeon Relive software. It just overrides the default version. So when we choose the graphical settings with Spider-Man, it'll actually say FSR 4. We can also check that it's enabled in-game. I didn't turn on any of the presets, quality, performance or balanced. I left it at native. So this is FSR 4 native, 2560 by 1440. Looks nice and crisp. I didn't feel the need to enable quality mode. I felt that the 82 FPS average was pretty decent. But there will still be a few dips and drops below 60 when using these settings. I wanted to try Atomfall next. I really enjoy this game, and with the Ultra preset at 1440p, we're looking at 74 FPS on average. I think this is a fantastic looking game as well. It takes place in the British countryside, and it runs really nicely. Not only that, but the consistency is solid too. We're looking at 64 FPS as that 1% low and 63 as that 0.1% figure. So not only does it run with at least 60 frames per second, but it's super smooth on the 9060 XT. Next up, we'll test the original Red Dead Redemption, which has a 144 FPS cap, and of course the 9060 XT had no issues hitting this. Our average was in fact 144. This is with FSR 3 enabled as the anti-aliasing solution and set to native. That said, there were a few dips and drops below this in certain areas, but this didn't affect the average. I think this is a really good looking game. Of course, it came out on consoles years ago, and it still looks good on the original PS3 as far as I'm concerned too. So on PC, with the extra graphical options, I think it still looks pretty decent, and yeah, it's still one of my favourite games, to be fair. So here we are, the dreaded Oblivion Remastered. I thought this was another good opportunity to test FSR 4. As I said before, we just enabled it from the Radeon Relive software, and we needed it here because this is footage from without it and the high preset. Even dropping to the medium preset, we couldn't hit 60 FPS consistently, so I thought, why don't we enable FSR 4 quality? It actually looks really good, and it gave us a chance to test FSR 4 too. So here with the high preset 1440p with FSR 4 quality, the game is looking nice and sharp, and better yet, our performance was improved. We're looking at 71 frames per second. The 1% low was 53 and the 0.1% low was 31, so still a few issues, a few dips and drops, which I've come to expect from this one, but it looks fantastic and it's running a lot better now. It's also worth mentioning again the VRAM usage. The 8GB card would probably be struggling a bit more, but I don't want to comment too much until I've tested that, of course. Next up, we shall try the Witcher 3 Wild Hunt here. I've also tested this one with ray tracing enabled, but to start with, we're looking at 1440p with the Ultra preset and SSR set to low with TAAU for 127 FPS. SSR, or screen space reflections, were set to low because this can knock a lot off the average frame rate, so I thought it was better switched to low here, though we were still getting plus 60 FPS with it set to high. 127 was the average, the 1% low was 103 and the 0.1% low was 90. If we switch to ray tracing, just like in Cyberpunk, again we're better suited to 1080p. This is with the RT Ultra preset and FSR 2 balanced. Here we're seeing 65 frames per second, so we do need FSR enabled in order to make use of the full ray tracing feature set here. 65 FPS on average, 1% low of 54 and a 0.1% low of 51. This was actually really consistent with RT enabled, and it looks really good too. For Baldur's Gate 3, I went with the Ultra preset and TAA here, no issues. We're hitting at least 100 FPS. 109 was the average in and around the city here. The 1% low was 80, and the 0.1% low was 46. I think a sudden frame dip was responsible for this 0.1% low as I was exploring the city here. I wanted to try Dead Island 2 next because I picked this up as part of an Epic Store sale, and by sale I mean it was free on the Epic Store not long ago, So I downloaded it, I've been playing it a little bit. With the high preset at 1440p, it runs with 114 FPS, but there are a few little dips and drops here and there. For the most part though, looks great and runs quite well. Our penultimate game today is Fortnite. Now for this one I selected the high preset, and this enabled Lumen High and Nanite, which I just left on by default. I also selected TAA for the anti-aliasing solution here. Now just like in Call of Duty and CS2, you may want to turn things down a bit because this is an online competitive title and the more frames the better, but I thought let's see how well it handles it with these graphical settings, and quite well I think is the answer. 99 FPS overall, a 1% low of 81 and a 0.1% low of 54. So overall it looks quite nice and it runs fairly well too. So to finalise, we have Red Dead Redemption 2, and I'm going to revisit this one later in the week because for some reason it's performing well on average and it's looking great, 75 FPS with Ultra and TAA high, but the 1 and 0.1% lows are quite low, 47 and 41, and if you look at the frame time graph there's a little spike in it every so often, but all in all there we have the 9060 XT. Hopefully we're looking at a decent price, decent stock as well, and all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching. This has been my 20 game 1440p benchmark test with this new card. Really enjoying my time with it so far. I'll have more FSR 4 tests in the week, more ray tracing tests if that's something you want to see. We'll be testing a few individual games. Red Dead Redemption 2 comes to mind as well. Let me know your thoughts down below because I'd love to read your comments, and as always let me know the pricing and availability, what it's like where you live, because this card should start appearing when I upload this review as well. So all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already and you want to of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.